PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X? Which one is the better console and which one should you guys get? Well, spoiler, they're both very, very good consoles. You'll be extremely happy with either of these two. However, there are quite a few differences between these two consoles that might make you pick one over the other. We've done a similar comparison back in March, but that was before we knew the design of the PS5 or even the games and the graphics. So yeah, tons of new details to cover in this video, so without any further ado, here is the ultimate comparison between the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, covering the design, the specs, the games, the graphics, special features, and finally, the price. Are you guys looking for an engaging mobile game, something that you can play on the go, and then something that you can continue playing at home on your PC? Like, how cool would that be? Some of you might already know the game that I'm talking about. And that's of course Raid Shadow Legends, our sponsor for this video. But wait, don't skip, because Raid actually has some bonuses, some really cool bonuses for you guys. So make sure you stick around. My favorite part about Raid is the fact that this is an RPG game with a full campaign, PvP mode, and also PvE mode. It also comes with one of the best graphics that I've ever seen on a mobile game, and like I said before, you can play it on pretty much anything. Now, my favorite part about the gameplay itself has to be the dungeon mode, as it's not just super challenging, but it's also a great way for you to level up your champions. Not only that, but you can also leave these dungeons to run on auto mode while you do something else, and your champions will then level up on their own, which I think is really cool. It works on iOS, Android, as well as Windows and macOS, and all of your progress is synced and saved across all platforms, meaning that you can play on your PC and then simply go out and continue playing on your smartphone exactly from where you left off. And Raid has now launched a brand new feature called Tag Team Arena. In Tag Team Arena, you fight against other players, but you see, instead of a single 4v4 battle like in Classic Arena, you actually get to fight in 3 series of 4v4 battles, and whoever wins 2 battles out of 3 wins. And since this is a new game mode, anyone that manages to finish high up in the rankings gets some very unique rewards. Speaking of rewards, simply go to the video description, click on the links, and if you're a new player, you would get 50,000 silver, plus 50 gems, plus 1 energy refill, plus 1 clan boss key, plus 5 mystery shards, plus 1 day XP booster, plus 1 free champion, the Hex Weaver. All of the treasure will be waiting for you right here. Hurry up, because this promotion only lasts for the next 30 days. Okay, so starting off with the design, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X couldn't have been more black and white. Like, no, really. One's black and the other one's white. The Xbox Series X has this very elegant and classy look in all matte black. It is bigger and fatter than the Xbox One X, but that's because of the massive cooling system that this console needs. In terms of the ports, we have 3 USB Type-A ports, all USB 3.2. We have 1 on the front, and then the other 2 on the back. Other than that, we have an HDMI 2.1 port which supports 4K at 120Hz as well as 8K at 60Hz. We have an Ethernet port, a Kensington lock so that you can lock in your Xbox in place, very useful for public places, as well as the expansion slot for the first-party SSDs that Microsoft will be selling, which I'll be covering in just a second. The PS5, on the other hand, is completely different. First of all, it comes in this really nice matte white color with glossy black accents and a blue LED strip, which I'm assuming, same as on the PS4, would be changing its color based on the different states that your console will be in, such as rest mode, sleep, horror on, and so on. Size-wise though, the PS5 is gigantic. It is much taller than even the Xbox Series X, and also taller than pretty much any console ever made. It is also said to be very heavy at 4.8 kilograms, however, the PS5 is slimmer than the Xbox is. Now, when it comes to the ports, the PS5 features 1 USB Type-C port on the front, as well as a USB Type-A port. Now, we don't really know any other details, and Sony hasn't really shown us the back of the console just yet, but it is quite safe to assume that it will have an HDMI 2.1 port, an Ethernet port, a PSVR 1 port, and likely even a PSVR 2 port, which will allow the external receiver for the new PSVR to be connected, as the PSVR 2 will be a completely wireless headset. Also, I do expect a few more USB Type-A ports on the back aside from this. Now, there will be 2 models of the PS5, a regular version and a digital-only version, which lacks the Blu-ray drive. The digital-only version looks much better, as it's perfectly uniform. The disc version looks like it has this tumor that grew on its side. I don't know, it just doesn't look as good at all. And it's pretty obvious that when Sony designed the PS5, they first designed the digital version, as that's really the future. Speaking of models, there is a rumored second model of the Xbox Series X, just around the corner. So this is the Lockhart/the Xbox Series S version, which could look something like this. Personally, I really do like both, but I'm leaning more towards the digital version of the PS5's design. It's something about that just makes it look more futuristic, more high-tech, and I'm personally really into that. But yeah, let me know in the comments which design do you guys prefer. Now, when it comes to the specs, both of these consoles feature an AMD CPU and an AMD GPU alongside dedicated hardware for ray tracing, and also a very fast SSD. So you would assume that these consoles are identical in terms of performance, but that's not really the case. CPU-wise, both feature an AMD Ryzen processor based on the Zen 2 architecture. So these are basically desktop-class CPUs that you would find in AMD's latest offering. They're both 8-core processors, however, the Xbox Series X is clocked at 3.8 GHz, while the PS5 CPU is clocked at 3.5 GHz. And not only that, but Sony has confirmed that the PS5 CPU will be running at a variable frequency, meaning that while the Xbox will be running at a constant 3.8 GHz, the PS5 can go up to 3.5. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it will actually run this high. This was apparently done so that the PS5 has more power to divert to the GPU when needed, because otherwise the CPU might consume a ton of power even when the game itself doesn't actually require that much performance. On the GPU side, both GPUs are based on AMD's brand new Navi/RDNA 2.0 architecture, which, fun fact, isn't even out for PCs at the moment. It's coming out around December or so. Now, the Xbox GPU has 52 compute units, or cores, each clocked at 1.825 GHz, while the PS5 has 36 compute units clocked at 2.23 GHz. This translates to the Xbox having 12.15 teraflops of GPU compute power, while the PS5 has 10.28 teraflops. So that's a 1.87 teraflop difference. Is that a lot? Well, fun fact, the difference between the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X in terms of GPU performance is 1.8 teraflops. So this difference is quite significant. RAM-wise, they both have 16 GB of GDDR6 memory. However, they're both using it in a fairly different way. For example, the PS5 has 448 GB per second memory bandwidth for the entire 16 GB chunk. The Xbox, on the other hand, it has 560 GB per second bandwidth, but only for the first 10 GB of memory, while the other 6 GB are running at a slower 336 GB per second bandwidth. Okay, so up until this point, it seems that the Xbox Series X is superior performance-wise to the PS5. And this is indeed correct. However, the PS5 does have one big advantage, and that is when it comes to the storage. So both consoles now have flash storage modules, or an SSD, compared to the mechanical hard drives that we have in the current generation consoles. The Xbox Series X comes with a 1TB SSD, while the PS5 comes with 828 GB. So, you know, if you care about storage, then maybe the Xbox is a better option. But if you care about speed, there is a pretty significant difference between the two. So while the Xbox's SSD has a read speed of 2.4 GB per second, which is crazy fast, that's 50 times faster than what the Xbox One had. However, the PS5's SSD has a read speed of 5.5 GB per second, or 110 times faster than the PS4's and the Xbox One's drives. I'll get into more detail as to why this is important when we get to the graphics section of this video. Now, with both of these consoles, you will be able to expand that storage if you really need and want to. On the Xbox side, Microsoft will be selling these drives that they developed in partnership with Seagate, which will allow you to add 1 extra terabyte of storage to the console. Sony, on the other hand, they will not be selling any first-party SSDs. Instead, you will be able to buy any third-party M.2 drives from Amazon and literally replace the internal storage with that drive. However, there is a catch. That drive will need to be at least as fast as the speed of that internal drive. And, as of right now, there are no drives that even match that 5.5 gigabyte per second speed. Now, you can indeed connect external hard drives to both of these consoles, but you would not be able to play any next-generation games from those, as those drives are simply way too slow. However, you can store your current-generation games on those, which will be playable on both of these consoles. But specs don't really mean anything if there are no great games to take full advantage of them. So what games are we getting for each console? Well, this is where the biggest difference between these two consoles really is. You see, on the PS5, you will have exclusive titles, exclusive games. So just like on the PS4 right now, all games made by Sony Studios will only work on the PS5 moving forward. So that means that the next Spider-Man game will only work on the PS5, the next Horizon Forbidden West will only work on the PS5, the next God of War will only work on the PS5, and so on. The good news is that those games will look absolutely incredible and truly next-gen. The bad news is that, well, you need to buy a PS5. Now, when it comes to the Xbox, things are entirely different. Microsoft says that for the first 2 years, there will be no exclusive at all on the Xbox Series X. So this means that any new game that you buy for the Xbox will work on the Series X, the Xbox One X, the Xbox One S, the Xbox One, as well as on any Windows PC. So the great news here is that you don't really need to buy the Xbox Series X to take advantage of these new games. The bad news, however, is that the games will not look as good as exclusives will on the PS5. More about that when it comes to the graphics. Okay, so now which console will have better graphics? And same as with the games, this is where it gets tricky. So if you're into cross-platform games, such as Call of Duty, Fortnite, Minecraft, Overwatch, Assassin's Creed, basically anything that works on both the PlayStation and the Xbox, those games will run better on the Xbox. Most of these developers have already confirmed that the Xbox Series X version of those games will run at higher resolutions and frame rates on the Xbox Series X. In fact, Microsoft is actually aiming for a full native 4K experience at least 60 frames per second, with some games even targeting 120 frames per second. Sony, on the other hand, they haven't really confirmed that they're even targeting 60 FPS. In Sunny Up Games, for example, the developer of the next Spider-Man, they confirmed that Spider-Man Miles Morales will have a 60 frames per second mode. But their tweet is a bit strange, and it kind of implies that you'll have to choose between 4K and 60 frames per second. Or if you want 60 FPS, you'll need to have some graphical options disabled. On the other hand, since the PS5 will indeed have exclusives at launch, these games will indeed look true next-gen, while the games at launch on the Xbox Series X, since those are cross-platform / non-exclusive games, they will just look like current generation games, just in high resolution and at a higher frame rate. Take a look at Halo Infinite, for example, for which we actually got a gameplay reveal last week. And the game looks decent, so it runs in native 4K at 60 frames per second, which is really impressive, but the graphics themselves, they just look like current gen. Like, take a look at the grass in the game and the lighting. Now, compare it to, let's say, Last of Us Part 2 or Ghost of Tsushima. In these games, the foliage density is significantly higher. Not only that, but in Last of Us Part 2, you can even interact with the foliage to the point where you can, for example, bump into a pine tree and you'll actually see the snow fall off of it, which is pretty incredible. Also pay attention to the lighting, and I'll compare both of these to how it looks in Halo Infinite. Also keep in mind that Last of Us and Ghost of Tsushima are PS4 games. Halo Infinite is a next-gen title. Now, Digital Foundry, they've made a full video about this, so I'll leave that linked below in case you want to learn more about why Halo Infinite looks so current-gen. But long story short, when you develop a game, you have to develop it on the weakest common denominator, and then let the more powerful hardware run the same game at a high resolution and at a higher frame rate. Otherwise, if you develop the lighting and the physics on a higher-end platform, porting that down is going to be incredibly difficult. Like, talking from past experience, I've done that in the past, that mistake, and it's really, really difficult to fix. Now, Halo Infinite, for example, was developed on the Xbox One. Yes, it was developed on the Xbox One and then ported onto the Xbox One X, the Xbox Series X, and then onto PC. Now, luckily, Microsoft has also showed us a few games developed on the Series X, which would not work on the Xbox One at all, so just Series X and PC. Those games were the new Fable, State of Decay 3, Forza Motorsport 8, and a few more. And finally, these games definitely looked like next-gen titles. Unfortunately, Microsoft hasn't said when we'll get these games, but it seems like they will all come out after those first 2 years have passed. As again, these games will now be exclusives rather than games that will also work on the Xbox One series in order to take full advantage of the hardware inside the Xbox Series X. Okay, so what does this all mean? Well, at launch, cross-platform games will look better on the Xbox Series X, while exclusive games, they will look better on the PS5. As the Xbox will not really have any exclusives at all until at least 2 years after launch. Now, we don't really know yet to what extent the cross-platform games will run better on the Xbox Series X. And that's because the PS5 also has that really fast SSD, if you guys remember that. And here's something really interesting. If you take a look at Star Citizen, which is a game that is actually a PC exclusive, that game has been fully optimized to take advantage of SSD storage. And if you have an M.2 flash storage, for example, that game can actually run up to 20 frames per second higher than if you were running the exact same game on the same platform with the same specs, but on a hard drive. And the speed difference between a hard drive and a standard 2 GB per second M.2 flash module is a factor of 40x. The speed difference between the PS5's SSD and the Xbox SSD is only about 2x. Not enough to give us 20 frames per second or anything like that on the PS5, but luckily something that can make the performance gap look smaller between these two consoles. Okay, so what about special features now? Anything unique in terms of each console that might make you pick one over the other? Well, the controllers are a pretty big difference here. The Xbox Series X controller looks almost identical to the Xbox One X controller, which is not necessarily a bad thing, as that controller was regarded by many as the best controller on the market. And the biggest improvement that we get with the Xbox Series X controller is something called a dynamic latency input, which is supposed to significantly reduce the input lag, making this controller likely the best controller choice if you're into competitive gaming. Now, on the PS5 controller, this is a full redesign over the PS4 controller. Over the Xbox controller, we do have a touchpad and also haptic support, similar to what we have on modern smartphones, just on steroids, to give you the ability to feel different surfaces in a game. So yeah, I'm really curious to try this out. The next difference in terms of special features between these two consoles is when it comes to backwards compatibility. And this is where the Xbox has a massive advantage, allowing you to play Xbox One games, Xbox 360 games, and even original Xbox games, while the PS5 will only allow you to play PS4 games. Also, the Xbox does feature the Xbox Game Pass, which lets you play a selection of games via a monthly subscription. Pretty amazing if you just want to try some games out. Sony does have PlayStation Now, which is also a monthly subscription, but this one streams games rather than downloading games, so the quality is a bit affected here. Now, you can actually download some games on PlayStation Now, but only a few. However, one big advantage here to the PlayStation could be the new 3D audio engine. So this is a hardware-based engine which will immerse you significantly more into a game by giving you 7.1 surround sound in all PS5 games. And finally, let's talk about the price. So the prices have not been revealed as of yet, which means that the prices that I'm going to give you are based on leaks from some reliable sources. Now, the PS5 is set to start at $400 for the digital version, and then $500 for the disc version. The Xbox Series X is set to start at $500, but we've also seen reports that Microsoft will also launch another Xbox, the Xbox Series S, so to say, that's the rumor name, which could start at around $300. However, the Xbox Series S will also be considerably less powerful than the Xbox Series X, whereas both versions of the PS5 are identical in performance. Okay, so in the end, which one is the better choice? Well, it's a tricky one, because you see, if you care about cross-platform games, and if you're a competitive player, then the Xbox is a better choice. However, if you mostly care about story-based games and exclusives, then the PS5 is a better choice. And also keep in mind that the Xbox will be getting exclusives about 2 years after launch, so if you already have an Xbox One X, for example, you don't really have to buy a Series X. But yeah, let me know in the comments which one would you guys pick and why. If you want to see more in-depth tech videos like this one, hopefully definitely subscribe, and also consider becoming a member to get those really cool badges in the comments next to your name. And you're also supporting the channel by doing so. So thank you for watching. I'm Daniel, this has been ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.